Okay, well, it's Friday, and I'm glad you're all joining me here for today's illustration masterclass on the topic of painterly brushstrokes in Photoshop and Fresco. A lot of times, one of the things that people don't enjoy when they make a transition from traditional media to digital, or when they just start out in digital altogether, is they think that digital has a very flat look to it, and that you can't get brushstrokes that feel like they're alive and that have happy accidents, that have texture and a certain rich quality to them that normally you would find only with traditional media, unless you know where to look and how to use these applications to achieve those results. And so today, we're going to look at how to do that. And there are several ways that I will cover. And if it starts to run a little long, I may actually pick this up in a follow-up episode to show you some more things. But today, I'm going to start with selection of brushes. Okay, that's obviously very important since it is the brush stroke that makes the big difference there. Selection of brushes. I'm also going to talk about some of the features that are in Photoshop, like color dynamics and how to use those to achieve a more painterly look, more variation in your brush strokes in terms of the hue and saturation and value. And I'm also going to talk about mixer brushes as a category of brushes in Photoshop and Fresco. And I will then hop over to Fresco and demonstrate a couple of techniques we have there, such as the multicolor eyedropper tool and the live brushes. All of these combined can give you some pretty fantastic results. So I'll say hi to some folks in the chat and then we'll get going. So let's see here. We have Jessica and Tim and Anaisa, Jortirmia, and hi Cody. And we have Golden, nice to see you as well. And Aubrey, hello, hello. Thank you everybody for joining me. And Lady Boss, that's the coolest name. Why don't we get cracking? Okay, now, to start off, we are going to be looking at, here's something I just illustrated a few minutes before the show here, and I thought it'd be fun to sort of recreate this illustration for you live, just talk about the basics of using one single brush that can give you all these effects in combination with a little bit of the Smudge tool. And I should have mentioned that up front because Smudge can be a very good friend of yours when you're working in this way and trying to get a more painterly look for your illustrations. So I'll hide this for a moment, and I'll tell you about the brush that I was using for this. Now, if you are a Photoshop subscriber or a Fresco subscriber, you have access to over 1,800 different custom brushes created by yours truly. They're the work that I did for about a span of 5 straight years, just trying to build this brush library, which is now available to all of you, and that's exciting. So in order to access them in Photoshop, what you want to do is go to your brushes panel, and in the top right corner you'll see this little drop down menu that looks like 4 little lines stacked on top of each other. So let's see if I can zoom in on that a little bit. Okay, right here, and you'll see that you can get more brushes. Now, when you tap on Get More Brushes, what winds up happening is it's going to take you out to the Adobe website and the brush library, which is going to be a perfect place for you to sign in, and then you have this ridiculous wealth of brush sets available to you. And I recommend starting with the Mega Pack if you're interested in painting, and possibly the Impressionist brush set. But here inside the Mega Pack, which is where I am right now, you have a paint box. Now inside that paint box you have about 90 different brushes, all of which are going to achieve a different look meant for painting specifically. And the brush that I've been using in particular for this apple illustration is in the rich oil category. Here we go, oil rich, pardon me. And there are several of those. And so I've got this oil rich brush, and right off the bat you're going to notice that when I paint a stroke with it, that is not your average flat, boring brush. And the reason for this is we're taking advantage in Photoshop of several different brush features, okay, that you can activate and modify in the brush settings panel, which you'll find right here, brush settings. Now to start with, we do have shape dynamics employed, where the pressure is going to control the diameter of the brush. So more pressure is going to give me a bigger stroke. Okay, you notice something else happening, which is these irregular edges that we're getting right here. Well, that is due to scattering. You'll see that I have a value of 45% here for the scatter. I also have a count of 3. What does that mean? It means that the brush there are 3 instances of the stamp, which is the shape of the brush, being applied at the same time when I do a paint stroke. And because they are scattering, okay, which means they're moving off of the main line I'm drawing, the axis there, they're being shifted one way or the other slightly, and there are 3 different instances of them, you're going to get an irregular pattern like this when you paint a brush stroke. Now, that is fantastic, very useful. In addition to that, though, you'll notice we have some texture coming through, okay? If I use light pressure, you can see that little texture. What is that? That is a canvas texture that I have applied, and I've got it right here, and you can see the library of textures that you build up over time. Normally I have about 300 or 400 textures that are in this menu. I've just gone back and reinstalled Photoshop 2019 because I was having issues with my drawing tablet with the latest update, and I didn't want to try and figure out how to fix those before the show. But you would normally see about 200 or 300 or more of these textures from my here. If you want to add one, right, in this case I've got this texture assigned to this brush. We don't see it here, but all I have to do is come down to this little gear and say new pattern, and it shows up right there. And the way this is working is I have it set to read the height of that image. And so with light pressure, okay, I'm going to see some of that texture coming through, right? And as I bear down, there's less of it there, okay? But this is another way to get more life out of your brush strokes, to employ texture with that. And that's something I can talk about in another show where we talk about how to control all these brush settings, but I wanted to point them out. Now, color dynamics, something I'm going to talk about a little later in a little bit more detail, but I do want to point out that color dynamics are employed with this brush, and there are lots of things you can do with them, but in this specific instance, what's happening is the hue, saturation, and brightness of the color that is right here, my foreground color, all right, is going to be shifted slightly. So only a value of 2% for hue and saturation and a value of 5% of that color that I've selected, which means it's going to be doing this. It's going to be kind of moving a little bit this way, a little bit that way, a little bit that way, a little bit that way, every time a new instance of the stamp is applied over the length of that stroke. So what that means is you're going to get this excellent variation in there. If I zoom in, you should see that it's a little darker over here, a little lighter over there. It's very subtle, but it's enough to give you that impression that every brushstroke is unique and you're not just building up flat color. Now, to make this more pronounced and more obvious, I'm going to take the brightness jitter up to a value of 12, and I'll do a couple of strokes, and you'll see that? Now it's really pronounced, okay? So that's just helping you to understand what's happening, right? Only in a much more subtle way. Now, sometimes you might want to do this. You might want to have it turned up a lot more. And what's nice is because I have transfer set to 69 here and 10%, what that means is with lighter pressure, the opacity is not 100%, okay? And so I can take those effects, those dark and light effects that are coming from the color dynamics, and I can sort of play them down by using less pressure as well. All right, now let's reset my color dynamics back to 5. 6 is fine too, doesn't matter. And let's get to painting. So the way I worked on this apple illustration was I just put down a base color, and I'm following that form of the apple, right? So the contours there on the outside, whatever that shape is. But I'm following in that direction with my brush. Why is this important? Well, you want to get in the habit of wielding your stylus in the same way that you use a brush. Now, when you use a paintbrush and you want to paint anything, whatever the shape might be, the shape of an object, okay? Do you scrub like you're playing with crayons? No, you don't. You actually deliberately paint in a certain direction to follow the silhouette or whatever it is you're painting, and on the inside as well, or sometimes travel across the form, right? It's important to use those same techniques when you're working with digital brushes so that you get that same look. Okay, so keep that in mind so you're not just doing everything with that sort of coloring action like a coloring book. All right, now pause for a moment here and see if we have any questions in the chat. Yes, I'm using a Wacom Cintiq. This is a 22 HD. It's about 4 years old. To answer that question, I've got quite the collection of brushes. Oh, Jessica, you don't know the half of it. I've got way too many, but I love all of them. They're all like my little babies. Let's see here. All right, so I don't see. Let's see. Might be able to answer when he looks at the chat. Mark's question: which model Cintiq? Yeah. Okay, 22 HD. Alrighty, so moving on. Now with just this one brush, you can see I'm getting a nice range of looks here for my brush strokes, okay? And I haven't even been resizing the brush, right? So of course you can size it up and down. Now for that core shadow, I'm gonna go a little cooler, go a little darker here, and just kind of cut across the form there. Make that interesting shape. And then I'm gonna go back to where we were here, go a little bit cooler and a little bit darker, but not quite as dark as that core shadow, okay? Because of all that variation I'm getting in the color, hue, saturation, and value, thanks to color dynamics, it's already looking kind of interesting there, right? Every now and then I just kind of stab at the canvas. Maybe you can even hear that through the microphone where I'm getting a little bit more aggressive with it. All right, now I'm going to zoom in here for a moment. I want to see what I'm going to do here. I'm going to use light pressure, right? Because of that opacity that I have control over, I'm just going to paint over this dark area right here and then sample that color. I'm using the Option key to temporarily call up my eyedropper tool. And then I'm going to come along here at the edge with light pressure. And this is what I'm doing is I'm sort of softening the edge there, here and there, to make it blend a little bit more with this color, this main body color, if you wish, for the apple. Okay, now up here I want to go lighter, so I'm going to go just a little bit warmer and a little bit lighter, just using my color picker there, nothing fancy. Okay, and I'm just going to hit the top of this apple with that lighter color. Okay, going back to that other color. And I want to go a little darker here in that core shadow, make my brush a little smaller. I do that with the bracket keys, by the way. Everyone's got a different technique, but I like to use the bracket keys. Make sure I get darker here on the edges. I use the bracket keys up and down. Right, you have your right and left bracket keys. Right is to size up your brush and left is to size it down. Now, another thing you can do is assign a hotkey to the smudge tool. If you're doing a lot of digital painting, right, more than anything else, and you like to use that smudge tool, I've gone into my preferences. So I go to my Photoshop preferences. I go to Edit, Keyboard Shortcuts. There it is. Edit, Keyboard Shortcuts. And I go to my Tools right here. And I come all the way down to Smudge. Alrighty, let's find Smudge. And you see I've assigned the letter S on my keyboard there. So what I can do is quickly jump to the S on the keyboard, and that just calls up my Smudge tool. So here I can do a little blending if I want. I can always paint over that anytime. I try to be careful with the Smudge tool just to give it a hit here or there, but not to do a scrubbing action with it, because look, if you do a scrubbing action, it winds up just kind of blurring things too much. So I'm careful about that, right? Just a little hit there and here and there, you know, just to break up some of those edges. You know, keep things interesting. I want to go a little cooler here on this face of the apple, just for move my temperature from warm to cool as we get into the shadow here. I just think that's better. Alrighty. Okay, now come back over here with this. Just go a little lighter now up here as we continue to model this apple. Remember, I'm doing all this with one brush. This is just that oil-rich brush, okay? There we go. Come back very softly, light pressure, come over some of those areas. And that's just enough to kind of soften that transition. Right? And here and there you might want to go a little harder with the brush, more of that sort of aggressive approach as well. Alrighty. Now you get the idea. So I'll go for a complementary color here with a greenish gray. And the outside just to sort of bump up against that color. That makes it look even brighter, right? That's just a trick, you know, use a complementary color. Gonna go a little lighter as we come down this way. So you could do that up against the edge, right? All right, so everything I'm doing here with this one brush, you see, is really doing the trick. And I can finish out the painting that way. And I'd be fine. And this is the thing about custom brushes. You really don't have to use a lot of them to get the look you want. You just have to use the ones that feel right for what you're trying to achieve and for the way that you paint and draw, right? And that's why there's so many of them to choose from, so that you find the one that really speaks to you and makes you go, ah, I found it, my golden child, right? The one that just gets you where you need to be. All right, so just zoom in there. You see all that nice rich texture and color variation we're getting right there with that one brush. Now, just for comparison's sake, why don't we grab something else and see how these can help you out with a different look. Glazer's Edge, for example. Excuse me. Now what this brush does is it makes every brush stroke kind of visible until you start to build up towards solid color. And when you do, just go ahead and grab a slightly lighter version of it, like this, and hit it, like that. Hit it again. You know, I like to do this, to sort of bounce back and forth with my eyedropper tool, just to put a few light strokes over something to make it look like, okay, there's a brush stroke that's just gone over it. Okay, but this is a completely different look that you could paint with, right? Maybe the same kind of subject matter, like an apple or something like that. You can see how different that is. But again, we're trying to sort of avoid that, wow, that's just so round brushy. You know what I mean? That's what we're trying to avoid, isn't it? We don't want it to look lifeless. Okay? So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just using a completely different brush. It's a very different look to it. Why don't we go for some crazy highlight down here, reflected light, and then paint over it. So it's just a little subtle color change there. See how I cooled that off with that green? And come back in there, cover that up. And then I can come back over this and soften that transition right there. So now I'm working in a completely different way. Let the brush sort of dictate the marks that you make. That's the nice thing about using a variety of brushes. You can't do the same thing with every brush, right? So the limitations that the brush presents you with will, of course, impact how you paint with it, right? And that's a really cool thing. It's nice to be able to get that variation coming from limitation, okay? That it's going to change your style, essentially, is what I'm trying to say, okay? It's a roundabout way, very long-winded roundabout way of saying, let your style evolve out of using these different tools, okay? I think you'd be pleasantly surprised to see where they take you. Grab that smudge tool if I want. I can always soften that. Come in here, do a little bit of smudgy stuff. Okay. Oh, I like what just happened there when I did that coarse shadow super dark. It's kind of fun. I can smudge that together too. Ooh, I like that. Just playing around here, gang. You get the idea, right? Okay, I can come in with white and like carve out more of that silhouette that I want, you know. It's Sky's the limit. You know, you just cut it down. Maybe somebody ate that apple, and that's what it looks like now. Anyway, all right, let's undo that. Stop being silly. You get the idea, right? So we're going to make that really, really tiny and just whoop. There we go. Forgot the highlight, didn't I? Well, don't worry. You can always pop that in there. Paint around it. Grab some smudge. And you're golden. So I hope this is helpful to see me just doing the same subject with different brushes. All right, and one more from this collection I really want to highlight is the creamy brush. There are two of them. Just grab this first one here. And you'll see a similar sort of look to the brush we just used, as well as the first one we used, that oil-rich brush. And this one I loved so much that I did a variation of it for the default brush set that is part of Fresco. So if anybody has played with that brush, in Fresco it is called Chunky. And it's a variation of this brush I'm using right here at this moment called Creamy. And I just love it. You got all kinds of control of the direction of the stroke. Like you'll see the direction really is evident in how the bristles sort of flow through that stroke that you paint. You can see that very clearly. Make that a little pinker. There we go. Also really nice to smudge around when using this brush. Curious maybe to know what smudge tool I'm using. I'll show you here. That is in the, I believe, Fresco smudge tools that I made, but you can find anything similar to this. Let's see, or it might be in the Mega Pack. Let's see here in the paint box. We have a bunch of smudge tools. You could try the soft smudge, that's a good one. Thrash blend is quite nice. If I size that down a little bit, you'll see what that does. Leaves a little bit more of a sort of a visible mark when you paint with it. So try that out. Go a little darker here. Give ourselves a little shadow. Transition. Okay. So, important to note, I am, like I said, moving my hand with the stylus in a way that is more sort of irregular and it's not like I'm scrubbing with the stylus, okay? That's not going to give me the results I want. No sorry, Bob. I want to be moving with intention, okay? Around the form, across the form, vary the length of the strokes, and the quality of them with a variation of pressure, right? And for some of them, even, you know, the tilt is going to be impacted. It's going to impact how the brush behaves, okay? I like to do this sometimes, just throw a darker color in and then lightly paint on top just to add some variety. So there you go, 3 apples, 3 different brushes. Now, I want to move to explaining how mixer brushes work and how they can be a good friend of yours here in this exercise. So before I do, let's check out, see if we have any more questions here from the chat. Alrighty, let's see here. You love the names of the brushes. Thanks, Jessica. Is there a setting I need to toggle to get tilt on my brushes? I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro. No, brushes will have tilt assigned to them or they will not. So at least the brushes I made, you know that they have tilt assigned to do certain things. When you go to the settings, for example, shape dynamics, instead of the control being direction, you might see pen tilt. Sometimes with some of my inking brushes, I have tilt assigned to control for the texture, dry brush effects for like Sumi inking brushes and whatnot. Alrighty. All right, we explained how to get the brushes. Yeah, you get them with your Adobe ID, either through Photoshop or Fresco under Get More Brushes. You like the contour crayon? Nice, nice, nice. I do not have touch capability enabled on my Cintiq. I do have it, but I don't use it. Alrighty, okay, great. So let's move on quickly here now to mixer brushes and talk a little bit about them. Now there's a category of brushes in Photoshop that is underappreciated and underutilized called mixer brushes. What are they exactly? I'm going to get these apples out of the way here. And I'll show you. If you go into the Mega Pack, you can find some mixer brushes that are ready for you to go. Go into the Real Oils category here, for example. And here you're going to find some mixer brushes. Now you know you're looking at a mixer brush when you see this icon of the brush with a little drop of water next to it. See that? That means you're looking at a mixer brush. Okay, now let me select one of those. We'll play around with it and show you what happens, okay? So I'm going to grab the Goody's a nice one. But I think I'm going to use, let's do Oil Deluxe. How about that? Oil Deluxe, okay. Now, paint a few brush strokes. See, that's got a little canvas texture to it, right? If I grab another color and paint into it, look at what happens. See that? Starts to pick up that color and mix the two together. Hence the name mixer brushes. Now you have a couple of options with mixer brushes that are pretty interesting. One of which I'll demonstrate now. As I'm painting here, okay, I want you to notice right up here in this top left corner, okay, see this right here? This is a special color swatch viewer, okay, that is showing you what is loaded onto your brush separate from your normal color picker here with the foreground and background color. And you'll see there's a little bit of red in there. So look at that. The next time I make a brush stroke, did you see that? A little bit of red was in that brush stroke. That is because I've opted not to have the brush clean itself. So if I come over here where there's red and green and I mix all that together, look at that swatch now. It's got a bunch of stuff in it. The next time I make a stroke, that's what it looks like. All right, so that's interesting, right? You have these options here to load the brush every time you make a new stroke. So if I load the brush after each stroke, what it means is I make a brush stroke here, okay? And instead of it staying like this, it's gonna load it with my foreground color right away the moment I lift my stylus, okay? So I can choose to do that. I can also choose to have it clean the brush, okay? Now once that's done, look, I can grab this green here and paint with it, grab this orange and paint with it. And even though I've painted into the green and normally my brush would be dirty, it's not. The next time I make a brush stroke, it's fine. All right, so these are settings you can change, okay? All right, now, one of the cool things about mixer brushes is you can choose to select color from your canvas that is not simply one hue, saturation, and value like the normal eyedropper tool. And this was actually what led us to develop the multicolor eyedropper tool in Fresco, which is very powerful. But there's a kind of version of that available in Photoshop exclusively with mixer brushes, and I'll show you how that works. So with this brush that I'm using at the moment, okay, if I decide, well, I'd like to paint with some red and some blue on my brush, I'd like to load it up like a traditional oil painter would. I could come over here, there's a little drop down where that color swatch is. And here at the bottom it says load solid colors only. There's currently a check mark there. I just uncheck that. And now, if I hold down my option key, like I'm using my eyedropper tool, and just select right here, you'll notice that that selection is reflected here, where I've got the red and the green. Next time I make a brush stroke, see that? That red and green are there on my brush. Over here, got a little yellow, blue and red. Make a brush stroke. Look at that. They're both there. This can be quite handy for people who really are into oil painting and want to emulate that experience here in Photoshop, right? So again, the way that's done is you come in load solid colors only, have that unchecked, and you're going to be able to select multiple colors from the canvas and paint with those like so. So a lot of big interesting mixer brushes here for you to play with if you're into the mega pack. Okay, they're in the real oils category. Obviously not going to go through all of them, but just some to point out. I like the Sargent Fat. That's a nice one. It's got a really nice quality to the brush stroke as well. Nice blending, and as you can see there, very, very rich, kind of a wet oils kind of a look to it, right? Another interesting thing you can do with mixer brushes, why don't I just hide all this for a moment? I want to show you something interesting here. And I'll do it with the Cake Thick brush. Here it is. The Cake brush, if you notice up here with every mixer brush, you have these options for the wetness of the brush, the mixing, okay? These two things are important. In this case, I have the wetness set to 0, which means there is no mixing at all. Now, why would that be useful? Well, I'll show you. So here's something you can do to make your brush strokes look a little bit less digital, less flat. You see here I put some color down, and yes, it's totally flat. We don't want that. So I'm going to take a color that's slightly darker here, okay? And lightly just kind of graze over part of the canvas here, over that blue. I'm just making some random marks over there, okay? And grab a little bit more of that light blue again. Okay, now I'm going to hold down my Option key and select this area right here. And because it has a mix of those two blues, look what happens the next time I make a brush stroke. It's got that look of like gooey paint being dragged around, almost like an impasto kind of effect. So there's a quick and easy way to make yourself a color swatch that you can paint with that is going to give you some variation in every stroke, like the bristles of a brush pulling through. And the Cake brush is a nice way to show an example of that. I just covered a lot of stuff here with mixer brushes and how to use them, as well as quite a few techniques. So I'll check and see if we have any questions from anybody. Are mixer brushes a separate download? No. If you come over here to your brush tool, you'll notice that mixer brushes are right there at the bottom. So Photoshop comes with the ability to use mixer brushes right off the bat. The mixer brushes you choose to use, of course, can be whatever you create yourself, but it's easier to, of course, grab these brushes from the Photoshop brush library and use those. So that's another thing, of course, that you can do. If you choose to make your own, though, it's as simple as selecting the mixer brush tool right here, and then coming over and assigning, like you would any normal brush, assign stamps, textures, and whatnot. There are only a few things that can't be applied to mixer brushes. A dual brush, for example, color dynamics, and wet edges. These are not possible. However, I'll show you something cool in Fresco that kind of makes anything possible, and that's that multicolor eyedropper tool. All right, so mixer brushes. All right, a couple more questions before we move on. Let's see. The gooey strokes. Yeah, you love that, Gunja. Cool. Glad you like that. I do too. I think it's pretty handy. All right, so we did a bunch of apples. We did some mixer brush strokes. And I do want to now talk a little bit about color dynamics and another cool thing you can do with those to make your brush strokes more painterly. Before I do, though, I did want to highlight one more brush that I really love, and that was in, I believe, the summer 2018 brush set. Let me see about that. No, it's in the... Actually, there is a brush in here that I really like as well. The Ocean brush. Look at this one. Woo, that's lovely. So, look, it really, you know, folks, if you just have a nice selection of brushes, you can get away with simply tapping on a brush and painting, and you don't have to do any extra special work to make it look cool. But there is another brush that I really wanted to show you called the Washi Warren. It might be in the winter, or let's see, spring 2020 might be, there it is. Spring 2020 update, which you can get again from that download page where all the brushes are with your Adobe ID. So the Washi Warren, the reason I'm selecting this brush is it does segue right into the next thing I want to talk about with color dynamics, which is the ability to use your foreground and your background color together. Bet you didn't know you could do that. Well, you can, folks. So my foreground color right now is this orange color. I'm going to use a deeper sort of pinky color here, pinky purple fuchsia. And I'm going to pull up our brush settings to color dynamics, and I just want to show you something here that's pretty cool, which is that you'll notice here the color dynamics are turned on, and I have foreground and background jitter. Now, I want to show you something interesting. Here you can actually control whether or not, with your stylus, you can employ more of the foreground color or the background color in your brush stroke. And I'm going to set it to pen pressure. And what that's going to do is it means that when I use a lot of pressure with this brush, okay, I'm going to get this foreground color here. But if I use less pressure, okay, the color itself is actually going to move more towards that purpley color. Okay, I know that's a weird thing to look at and understand. So why don't we grab the mushy brush to understand this better. The mushy brush already has these settings employed. So I'm going to do a light brush stroke and then move to a heavier color, heavier pressure, I mean. And what you should see is a segue from this color. And in fact, if you want me to make this really obvious, check this out. See that? Wait a minute. That's cool, isn't it? So as I paint strokes like this and just vary the pressure along the way, I'm going to get a variety of colors just based on, let me turn that from multiply to normal, there we go. Just based on the pressure I'm using. So light pressure is going to give me this kind of a grayish color. What it's basically doing is mixing this blue and this orange color to make that color. Okay, so medium pressure is going to give me this kind of color. Heavy pressure is going to give me something a little bit more in the orange realm. If I come back over that with a light touch though, see that? Sort of more that bluish kind of blue-gray color, right? And then back again. I can just do this over and over again and get a ton of variation. So you can use this to your advantage. Let me grab a brush that's more opaque and we'll take a look at that. So for example, come back to our mega pack here for a moment. We'll grab the paint box. Or actually, you know what? Let's go in the gouache set. Another nice one to use for painting. And we'll see about the, let's see. I like this Gouache G wash brush. That's a nice one. Yeah. And let's go ahead and we'll take transfer and just pop it up a little bit so it's not quite so light. It's going to give me a darker stroke. And we're going to go to our color dynamics and turn that pen pressure on to control foreground and background jitter. All right, now here we go. See that? Fantastic. So as I do multiple strokes over one another, like this, you can see every individual stroke. And that's going to give you a much more painterly look. And of course you can make this more subtle. I'm doing this I'm exaggerating what it should look like, right? But maybe we go to like more of a yellowy color like that. So our foreground and background colors are similar to one another, right? But just by varying the pressure a little bit with each stroke, I'm going to get that nice variation going there. If I make this just a little lighter and a little more saturated, hopefully you can see that coming through. Just enough to make it interesting, right? See that? Just enough to make it interesting. And that does have a subtle texture to it, that brush as well. And again, that is the Gouache G wash brush, okay? So there you go. So that's something you can do with color dynamics with foreground and background color. Another thing you can do is set your background color to white. And if you set your brush mode to multiply, this is kind of an interesting idea. You put some color down, okay? And if I'm using really light pressure, that white is actually not going to do anything because the brush mode is set to multiply, and white multiplied with the color doesn't do anything to change it, right? So this is really handy if you want to do some really subtle blending work with a softer brush like this. And I could grab another color, okay? And change that from, oh, it's still on multiply. I'll go to normal for a moment. I'm just going to put that color over this one. And then come back here, set it back to multiply, and grab that smudge tool. Blend that, come back, go to normal, grab that color in the middle. Sorry, I want to grab a color that's similar in the background. Oh yeah, I can do this. Bounce between those two colors. Smudge it again. Go back and forth, keep playing with this. Go over with some texture like this Gouache G texture brush. That'll give you some nice texture, look at that. Come back on this side. And then you get that look of some of those bristles just laying that paint on a little heavier, right? This one's really opaque, and I can go ahead and set those same color dynamics right there. Pen pressure. And the moment I do that, I get this nice color in between that orange and that blue. Right? A little heavier at the bottom. I'm going to get more of the blue. Anyway, you just keep on going with this, and this is the kind of thing you can get. So please don't feel like you're going to get stuck with flat color when it comes to painting digitally. In Photoshop, we looked at mixer brushes, we looked at using color dynamics, we looked at just a selection of brushes you can use to paint in a painterly way. And there are so many of them. Of course, it would take hours to go through the whole list. But do remember that the real oils are going to give you a bunch of mixer brushes to play with. They're all different from one another, different amounts of mixing involved and whatnot. Got that cake brush, that technique of using mixer brushes without any mixing, but still selecting multiple colors that are similar to one another to get that sort of impasto look for your paint. And we did look at the oil-rich brushes, and of course there are many more. And before I jump over to Fresco really quickly, I do want to show you what you can do with the Impressionist brushes. So these take full advantage of the color dynamics we've been talking about, and there are many of them here, but this is just the French fat bristle brush, and I'll show you what happens when you paint with it. See that? It's taking advantage of those color dynamics in a much more obvious way. Okay, but if you're looking to do some kind of a Monet or Cezanne kind of brush work piece, instead of getting just a totally flat color, why not reach for one of these Impressionist brushes and go to town. In fact, here's a Monet brush right here. I like this one, this Monet 2. Very nice. So you can just imagine painting in a nice grassy area with this Monet brush. Vary the color a little bit here up towards the top, wherever you're meeting the light more with those grassy bits. And just enough color variation in there, and a tiny bit of canvas, tiny bit, is all you need to do some really zippy Impressionist brushstroke work, right? Isn't that nice? It's like cheating, isn't it? But you know, you still gotta know how to do it right. Still got to come up with a nice painting. Still got to do a decent image. It's not like it's just going to fall onto the canvas. But this will help you, right? This will help you with that. And yeah, there are a bunch of brushes in here in this particular set that are really fun. I like this one. This is called the Sharp Mess brush. See that? Can make a nice mess. Randomy kind of brush. Randomy is not a word, by the way, but we can make it a word on this show. Brush strokes like that. Pretty nifty. So I did want to point those out. You can even go into some Seurat kind of action, Georges Seurat, with some pointillism, right? Look at that. Pointillism on demand. Alrighty. So I'm going to pop over now to my iPad, and we shall see how that's going to change our presentation here, because now I'm going to be showing you some interesting tricks with the live brushes and the multicolor eyedropper. Now, you're sort of familiar with what the multicolor eyedropper tool kind of can do based on what we looked at with the eyedropper for your mixer brushes. Cody says, I like that mushy brush. What pack is that from, Kyle? That, I believe, was, gosh, I just forgot. Which update was that? Spring. Bear with me 1 second. I'll find it for you, Cody. Hang on. Spring 2020? Yeah, spring 2020. That's that one. Spring 2020. Okay, but I'm going to move my iPad over here so we can work on that while we chat here. Alrighty, now everybody can see that, I hope. Yep, good. First thing I want to show you is this multicolor eyedropper, which is just such a handy thing. And what it allows me to do is select multiple colors on the canvas. There are lots of things you can do with it, but I only want to show you what we do with painterly brush strokes specifically, because that's what we're focusing on today. So I'm going to come into my painting category, and I'm going to grab the wet bristle brush. And let's put some color down here. Oh yeah, there we go. And then put some other color on top of it, like that. And I'm going to hold down the touch modifier. The touch modifier is this little circle that you see me dragging around the screen. All right, I just use my thumb. I'm left-handed, so I put it in the bottom right of the screen. I just touch it, and while I'm holding it down, I touch anywhere on the screen, and I'm going to grab all those colors at the same time. And now, when I paint, oh yeah, that's the ticket. So what I like about the multicolor eyedropper tool in Fresco is that it respects everything that your brush normally does. So that includes dual brush, it includes wet edges, and it even includes the direction your brush is moving. The swatch itself will rotate with the brush, which is so cool. Now what you're seeing me do here is not very subtle, but I wanted to point out how it works. So let me clear that away for a moment. Now let's take a look at how that could work in a more subtle way. So I'm just going to grab the roughen brush here and put a little color down. There we go. And now go for something just slightly lighter, like so. All right, I'm kind of like stabbing at it a little bit here and there. There we go. I want some slightly lighter marks in there as well, punctuated with some darker bits. All right, that looks like a nice little swatch for me. I'm going to hold down my touch modifier and grab some of that. Okie dokie. And now I'm coming back to that nice wet bristle brush, and look at this. See that? You can see the brush strokes inside, and you could just go for days. Just keep doing it. And let's say you want to fill in a really big area on your canvas. Well, just look at how much rich variety you get in those strokes. Like that. Across I go, and up and down, and left and right. And It looks like paint. That's what I like. That's what I like. And now you might be thinking, well, yeah, but that's great, but you know, I have to stick with that color. I mean, I like that blend that I'm seeing, but I want to do it in blue. Don't worry, open up your color picker here. And we have our HSB sliders, and all I do is simply, you know, adjust the color there, maybe adjust the saturation, adjust the brightness. And everything about that swatch is still as it was with all the darks and lights, and I'm still gonna get that lovely variation in there when I paint. So fantastic. So your problems are solved when it comes to getting some quick and easy ways to get some nice variation in your brush strokes with the multicolor eyedropper. And make yourself any custom swatch you want, and just go to town. Now that stays there. When I go and switch to another brush, like that roughened brush I was using a moment ago, still there. See that? So look at that nice color variation I'm getting with the roughened brush right now. See that? Subtle and lovely. You can see every individual brush stroke right there that I'm painting. Who was the person Kyle mentioned? I think he said Seurat. Couldn't hear too clearly. Oh, Jessica, I was talking about Georges Seurat. Seurat, French Impressionist artist. Righty. Okay, cool. Now, so yeah, this is just lovely. Okay, so that's how you can use that multicolor eyedropper tool to your advantage and get some great effects. Now, of course, we do have Smudge. And Smudge and Fresco, you can use any brush that's already in the app. So that basically includes not just the brushes it comes with, the 90 or 100 brushes it comes with, but any brushes that you load separately or that are in your Creative Cloud libraries, etc. They can become a smudge tool. So for example, I can come to the rakes, grab that rake pressure brush and use that as a smudge tool. Look at that. Woo! Just kind of go on through there. Have some fun with it. All right, now, the really juicy stuff here in Fresco when it comes to natural painterly brush strokes, of course, the watercolors and the oils. Come here to the live brush category. We start with watercolor. Just go ahead and grab a wash flat brush, pardon me. One of the cool things about this is, of course, you can use those multicolor swatches with watercolor. So as I paint that stroke, right, you can see there are different colors in there. Look at that. And let's increase the amount of water we have, and look at that all flow together. Can't ask for much more than that, gang. That's what you want, right? You want paint? We got paint. There it is. I love it. All right, and again, I could come over here and increase that saturation and turn down that darkness. Still using that multicolor swatch. It's very subtle, and painting with it here with watercolor. Isn't that nice? Beautiful. I love it. Maybe you want to do some wet spatter. Sure, why not? Go for it. There it is. Maybe do some multicolor wet spatter. Let's grab a regular brush here. Put some pink down, put some yellow and some blue. Go ahead and grab all that at once, multicolor. Come back to our spatter and look at that. I'm using wet watercolor with multiple colors. Spatter. You can mix it up with a regular spatter brush from the effects category here. Just grab a spatter brush there and look at that. It's crazy. Come back to the watercolor, make all that wet again, blend it together. So, watercolor, very powerful. And I just want to finish quickly with the oils because they're so fun. So we'll grab the oils. And I think the chunky one is a good one to start with. Now I've already got this crazy multicolor swatch, so why not just paint with that? Look at that, you can see the thickness of the paint there. Grab another color. How about that swatch we were using earlier? See how nicely that blends. And with the oils, you can choose to, if you wish, make them mix a lot with what's on the canvas or not mix at all. If they don't mix at all, just paint right over it. No worries. Want them to mix a little? Just mix a little. Still gonna mix, but barely. All right? So, Painterly brushstrokes right out of the box there in the app. Easy to achieve. We've had fun looking at this in Fresco. We've looked at it in Photoshop. You do not have to paint with flat brushstrokes, folks. Don't limit yourselves. Don't feel limited by that. And thanks for watching. See you again next week for another masterclass. Everybody have fun painting and drawing and have a great weekend. Take care of each other, and I'll see you next time. Be kind. Remember that. Peace out.